Many enterprise AI projects fail before the model ever becomes the real problem, because the workflow was never clearly defined in the first place. That matters to you because unclear work creates bad automation, wasted effort, and systems your teams cannot trust or support. In this video, I will show you why unclear workflows quietly destroy AI initiatives, and what practical teams need to define before choosing patterns, tools, or orchestration. This is where applied AI stops being guesswork and starts becoming structured operational design. Part 1. Unclear workflows make AI projects unstable from the beginning. A surprising number of enterprise AI projects begin with a technical discussion before the work itself is clearly understood. People jump into model selection, user interface ideas, automation patterns, or integration options, while the underlying workflow is still vague. That creates a dangerous situation. The technology gets dropped into a process that nobody has fully described, and the team starts building inside operational fog. A workflow becomes dangerous for AI when it is ambiguous, exception-heavy, political, undocumented, or dependent on unwritten tribal knowledge. In those cases, people often know how to do the work individually, but the organization cannot clearly explain how the work actually moves from trigger to outcome. One person knows when to escalate, another knows when to ignore a rule. Someone else knows which data is usually wrong. That kind of hidden decision-making may keep the business moving, but it is a terrible foundation for automation. AI cannot reliably improve work that the organization cannot clearly define. If the path is unclear, the automation inherits the confusion. Then the project gets blamed for inconsistent output, when the deeper problem is that the workflow was never stable enough to support automation in the first place. This is why unclear workflows kill AI projects. They create unstable requirements, shifting expectations, weak test conditions, and endless edge cases. Project managers struggle to pin down scope. Business leaders believe the system should just know what experienced staff know. Programmers are asked to automate a moving target. Operations leaders see inconsistent behavior and lose confidence. Everyone is reacting to the same hidden cause. The work was never clearly modeled. Before blaming the model, the prompts, or the user interface, teams should ask a harder question. Do we actually understand the workflow well enough to improve it? If the answer is no, then the first priority is not smarter automation. It is clearer operational definition. Part 2. The common mistake is automating the visible task while ignoring the real workflow. The most common workflow mistake in enterprise AI is trying to automate the visible task while ignoring the rest of the work wrapped around it. A team sees something repetitive, such as summarizing notes, classifying documents, drafting responses, or extracting values from forms, and assumes that automating that one step will meaningfully improve the overall process. Sometimes it helps, but very often it does not solve the real operational problem. That is because the visible task is usually only one piece of the workflow. Around it are approvals, exceptions, rework loops, handoffs, timing dependencies, validation rules, escalations, and human judgment points. The organization may focus on the part that looks easiest to automate, while ignoring the parts that determine whether the process actually succeeds. So the AI feature works in isolation, but the broader workflow still breaks down under real business conditions. Automating a task is not the same thing as improving a workflow. That distinction is critical. A local optimization can create the illusion of progress while leaving the full process just as messy as before. This happens because task-level thinking is easier than workflow-level thinking. It is simpler to say, let's automate document classification, than to map what happens before classification, who checks the result, what exceptions exist, what downstream actions depend on the classification, and what happens when confidence is low. But without that broader understanding, the AI solution often creates new friction. People still have to clean up output, chase approvals, or correct routing mistakes. A better discipline is to ask, what work surrounds the task we want to automate? What decisions happen before it? What actions happen after it? Where does human review enter? Where do exceptions appear? Those questions force the team to stop thinking only about the shiny step and start thinking about the full operational chain. In many failed AI projects, the problem was not that the automation did nothing useful. The problem was that the team solved the most visible task while leaving the actual workflow undefined, unstable, or politically dependent. That is why the improvement looked better in theory than it felt in practice. Part 3. Map one workflow end-to-end before choosing an AI pattern. One of the most practical ways to improve enterprise AI decision-making is to map one workflow end-to-end before choosing the automation pattern. Not 3 workflows, not a broad business capability, one actual workflow with real boundaries, real owners, and real operational detail. That simple discipline prevents a huge amount of confusion later. A useful workflow map does not need to be fancy, it just needs to be honest. Start with the trigger. What event causes the work to begin? Then define the inputs. What information arrives and from where? Identify the decision points. Where does judgment enter the process? Define the outputs. What result is supposed to exist at the end? Then document exceptions. What goes wrong and how often? Finally, define the human review points. Where should a person inspect, confirm, reject, or override the result? That basic structure gives the team something concrete to reason about. You should map the workflow before you choose the AI pattern, not after. If the team jumps directly into copilots, extraction flows, retrieval systems, agents, or custom .NET components, it risks selecting a pattern that does not actually fit the shape of the work. Workflow mapping also improves communication across roles. Department heads can confirm whether the process description matches operational reality. Business analysts can clarify edge cases. Project managers can see dependencies and review points. Programmers can identify where logic belongs and where uncertainty still exists. Data and DBA teams can start asking better questions about source quality, structure, and reliability. The goal is not to create paperwork for its own sake. The goal is to reduce ambiguity before design begins. A team that maps one workflow clearly will make better pattern choices, estimate more realistically, and avoid building around assumptions that only exist in someone's head. In applied AI, workflow clarity creates leverage. It narrows the problem, exposes the true decisions, and gives the team a cleaner foundation for architecture. Without that map, tool selection becomes guesswork. With it, the conversation becomes much more disciplined. Part 4. Many AI failures are really workflow definition failures, not model failures. One of the most useful contrarian truths in enterprise AI is that many so-called AI failures are not really model failures at all. They are workflow definition failures. The model gets blamed because it is the most visible moving part. It produces the output, it looks intelligent, it is easy to criticize when something goes wrong. But in many cases, the model is being asked to operate inside a process that was poorly defined from the beginning. Think about what happens when the workflow is unclear. The handoffs are vague, the exceptions are undocumented. The decision rules shift depending on who is working that day. The desired output is not consistently defined. Human review expectations are fuzzy. Under those conditions, Even a capable model will produce results that look inconsistent or unreliable because the surrounding process is inconsistent and unreliable. The system is reflecting the confusion around it. The model often becomes the scapegoat for operational ambiguity. That is an important lesson for leaders because it changes where the investigation needs to begin. Instead of asking only whether the model is strong enough, teams should ask whether the workflow itself is bounded, explicit, and stable enough to automate responsibly. This is especially relevant in enterprise settings where experienced staff compensate for weak process design through judgment and workarounds. Humans can often navigate ambiguity because they understand context, politics, and unwritten exceptions. An AI system cannot safely depend on that same invisible operating model. It needs clearer boundaries. When those boundaries are missing, the business experiences the failure as an AI problem, even though the root cause was process ambiguity. A practical response is to diagnose failures at two levels. First, inspect the model behavior. Second, inspect the workflow definition around the model. Was the task actually stable? Were inputs consistent? Were review points defined? Were exceptions documented? That second layer of diagnosis is where many organizations find the real problem. Mature AI teams do not assume every bad result is a model defect. They know that operational confusion can flow straight through the system and show up as apparently bad AI. That is why workflow clarity is not a side issue. It is often the hidden determinant of whether the solution will be trusted at all. Part 5. Workflow clarity has to come before orchestration and architecture. Enterprise teams often get excited about orchestration too early. They start discussing agents, tool calling, routing logic, multi-step flows, and complex automation chains before the work itself is tightly defined. That creates a structural mistake. The architecture becomes more sophisticated while the operational foundation remains unclear. When that happens, complexity grows faster than understanding. Good orchestration depends on known work, bounded decisions, and explicit handoffs. If the workflow is not clear, orchestration does not solve the problem. It magnifies it. The system becomes better at moving ambiguity from one place to another. A routed process with vague responsibilities is still vague. An agent flow with undocumented exceptions is still unstable. A multi-step pattern without clear review points is still hard to trust and support. Workflow clarity comes before orchestration, always. Architecture should express an understood operating model, not compensate for a missing one. That principle matters because orchestration adds moving parts, dependencies, and failure modes. If the underlying work is unclear, those additional layers make diagnosis and support harder, not easier. In practice, this means teams should be able to answer some basic operational questions before introducing sophisticated architecture. What starts the workflow? What decisions are bounded enough to automate? What handoffs are explicit? Where does human review happen? What conditions trigger escalation? What outcomes count as success? Those answers do more to shape a responsible design than abstract enthusiasm about advanced patterns. This does not mean orchestration is bad. It means it must be earned. Once the work is clear, orchestration can add real value. It can sequence steps cleanly, route cases intelligently, and coordinate bounded actions in ways that improve speed and consistency. But those benefits depend on a defined operational structure underneath. The teams that build strong enterprise AI systems are not the ones that adopt the most elaborate architecture first. They are the ones that make the workflow explicit enough that architecture becomes a disciplined expression of the work. That order matters. When teams reverse it, they usually create elegant-looking systems that nobody fully understands or confidently owns. Part 6. Hidden exceptions destroy trust in automation. One undocumented exception path can make an otherwise promising AI workflow look unreliable. That is one of the biggest production dangers in workflow automation. A system may perform well for the common case, but if it encounters an exception that nobody documented, users immediately start losing confidence. From their perspective, the system is not mostly useful. It is unpredictable. Hidden exceptions exist in almost every business process. Special customers, missing data, late approvals, conflicting records, ambiguous classifications, manual overrides that only experienced staff know about. These are not unusual edge cases at the margins of the business. They are often part of the real operating environment. When teams build AI solutions around the standard path only, they create an automation that appears stronger in testing than it feels in live use. Automation credibility does not depend only on the happy path. It depends on how the workflow behaves when reality becomes inconvenient. If the exceptions are invisible in design, they become visible in failure. This is why exception discovery should be a deliberate part of workflow analysis. Ask the business what goes wrong. Ask which cases get escalated. Ask what experienced staff watch for. Ask where rework tends to happen. Ask which records are usually incomplete or politically sensitive. Those questions may feel less exciting than a demo, but they often reveal whether the automation is viable at all. Teams do not need to solve every exception on day one, but they do need to know which exceptions exist, which ones can be bounded, and which ones require mandatory human review. That knowledge shapes design choices, review paths, and user expectations. It is far better to say, this workflow handles these cases and escalates these others, than to pretend the system is broader than it really is. Users can tolerate limits more easily than they can tolerate surprise. When the system behaves consistently and hands off difficult cases clearly, trust grows. When hidden exceptions produce erratic behavior, trust collapses quickly. That is why undocumented exceptions are not a minor issue. They are one of the fastest ways to damage confidence in enterprise automation. Part 7. Use a workflow readiness check before proposing AI. A strong next step for most organizations is to introduce a simple workflow readiness check before proposing AI as the solution. This does not need to be a giant governance process. It can be a lightweight screen that forces the team to qualify the work before investing in design, prototypes, or architectural debate. The goal is not to slow innovation. The goal is to stop confusing unclear work with automation opportunity. A practical workflow readiness check can begin with a few questions. Is the trigger for the work clear? Are the inputs known and available? Are the main decision points understood? Are outputs defined in a way people agree on? Are the common exceptions documented? Are human review points explicit? Is there a real owner for the process? If several of those questions cannot be answered clearly, the workflow is probably not ready for AI design yet. That does not mean the idea is dead. It means the organization has preparatory work to do before automation becomes responsible. In many cases, clarifying the workflow will improve operations even before any AI capability is introduced. That alone makes the exercise valuable. This readiness check also helps align roles across the business. Department heads become more precise about what they want improved. PMs gain a cleaner basis for scoping. Business analysts can expose ambiguity earlier. Programmers stop being asked to automate invisible logic. Operations leaders gain more confidence that the design reflects reality instead of theory. Keep the check simple and repeatable. Use it to qualify work before solution enthusiasm takes over the conversation. If the workflow is clear, move forward with more confidence. If it is not, fix the operational definition first. That discipline protects time, budget, credibility, and technical effort. Enterprise AI works best when it is applied to work that is already understood well enough to improve. A workflow readiness check enforces that principle. It reminds the organization that the right first question is not, "What can we automate?" It is, "Do we understand this work clearly enough to automate it responsibly?" Enterprise AI becomes much more reliable when teams define the workflow before they design the automation. The organizations that get stronger results will be the ones that treat workflow clarity as a prerequisite, not an afterthought. Explore more of my work at ain.net.com. Thanks for watching.